Welcome again to EMA's Health and Safety Podcast. We really appreciate you either listening or viewing. And today we've got a sad but still very interesting topic to talk about. With me today in the studio is the incomparable Mauro Barsi. And Mauro, we're going to be discussing Whakaari White Island and the outcome of what that means with regard to people that are landowners, building owners. You know clearly a hell of a lot more about this than I do. But first, just wanted to acknowledge the loss of life. I think 22 people died, 25 other people were seriously injured. Just an absolute tragic circumstance for them, for the people that are deceased, for their families, for their whānau, for the communities. And there was a ruling that came out in February, I think. Can you take us through what that might mean?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be back. Again, a troubling conversation for us today. But it's been a year this year for some big health and safety cases. We've seen the Ports of Auckland case reasonably recently. And I think it was important just to reflect on this case as a big judgment in the year, a big kind of landmark in this space, and something that I think we're not necessarily putting a lot of time and focus on in our community. So I just wanted to maybe take this opportunity to raise the case, talk a little bit about what was going on, what it means, and the sorts of, I guess, decisions or thought pathways that people who are maybe a little bit further away from running the business per se still need to think about in terms of their health and safety obligations.
Yeah, cool. So tell us a little bit about the case. Tell us a little bit about what, not the actual event, but afterwards, what took place in the courts.
Yeah, so there's a bit of complexity here, and I might take a moment or two to dance through some bits, but at a kind of very high level, what effectively happened was there was an active volcano site. There was a tragedy. As you can imagine, health and safety step in. There's some conversations to be had, and there is ultimately some prosecutions that flow through from this. In particular, there is an entity, WML Limited, and they've got kind of two shadows to that organisation, or two organisations that are quite interconnected. One's kind of the ownership of the land company, and then they kind of give the rights to let people on the site and do the tourist walking. And that company just literally is the company that sort of gives the license to people to come on board.
Would both of those companies be considered a PCBU in this case? Is that maybe what the court case was about?
That's part of what the court's interested in, yes. So, and I guess ultimately the piece of the puzzle that's important is that this licensing entity goes through an initial kind of district court process and ends up with a kind of a $1 million-ish fine and a $5 million-ish, $4.8 million reparations bill. So there's a substantial response here, and ultimately appeals that on a whole heap of grounds. So then the appeal court gets the opportunity to grapple with some of these issues, what we describe as upstream liabilities.
Because neither of these organisations, and I'm just catching up here, neither of these organisations were the operator.
Yeah, exactly right.
So they weren't the tour operator, which was taking people out to the island, and had been for years and years. They were, as you say, upstream.
Yeah, so there's about 5 or 6 different tour operators, and part of the license is they sort of have to get together as a gang and have a conversation about how to manage the health and safety of people that are on the site. But kind of long story short, there's a conversation about if you are effectively the landowner or someone that's just licensing people to come onto your land, what are your obligations? What are you obliged to do? Where does the health and safety kind of barrier of liability stop and start in that space? And it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. So the magic words for today's conversation are managers or controls.
Managers or controls.
And if you're getting down almost to sort of not dancing on a pinhead, but really thinking about these issues, there's a couple of sections in the health and safety legislation, 36, 37. 36 pretty much says if you're running a business, you've got to make sure you're doing everything right. Perfect sense. We're not going to worry about that pretty much for today at all. And then there's 37, which says if you're managing or controlling a site, you've got to take some interest and you've got some liabilities as well.
Right.
And so obviously the first question is, well, are they one and the same thing?
Are they one and the same?
Yeah, this obligation sounds a lot like that obligation,
Okay,
right?
the managing and controlling, yeah.
So what the court says is, well, look, managing and controlling is kind of a little bit upstream from running the business.
Mm-hmm.
And so they start to ask questions like, how much active management and control can you really exercise, and do you really exercise over the workplace?
And therefore, what influence have you got on the
yeah,
outcomes?
now you're starting to get right into the heart of it. And so kind of in the first case, the courts sort of say, well, look, you give a license. The license says that, you can stop giving them access if they do a bad job.
Yep.
You're requiring them to do all of these things and have all of these documents and all of these obligations.
Yep. Some of which will include safety.
Yeah, like making sure you're running the safety processes,
Yep.
checking the various reports, getting activity reports on the site, all
Yep.
that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So, you've got a real active opportunity to get involved and get amongst the business.
Yep.
Plus, we think it's reasonable that you would do your own seismic management and assessment of the situation, etc., etc., etc. Which kind of, at first blush, makes some sense, right?
And that would be what you got the outcome. Don't know the legal term for which resulted in a $1 million fine and $5 million reparation.
100%.
Yeah, something like that. Yep.
And so they go back to court and they sort of say, well, look, I get why you've made that assessment,
Yep.
and I understand the significance and the seriousness of the situation, but this doesn't quite feel like the right place to draw the line.
Okay.
And so, and I think for people that, if you will, provide the space for businesses, this starts to become a really interesting conversation, because whilst it's a landowner conversation,
Yep.
in a similar sense, you could be thinking about, well, what if I own the building
Yep.
and I lease the building to people who do the actual job? And there are various levels of my site, your business, and that's what this case is about.
And that happens all over the country.
100%.
Plenty of buildings around the country are not owned by the people that that are operating their businesses in it. They are leased by them.
So what I think, and again, it's 100 pages long of case.
Yep.
So accepting that I'm being a little bit, I'm painting with a broad brush in today's conversation. What I think effectively the court says is, look, you don't really control the workplace. You're not there telling these people where to walk, how to walk, what the day should look like, etc., etc.
Yep.
Effectively, what you do is you provide access. So you're in support of this business, getting it up to the starting line,
Yep.
but they run from the starting line onwards. If
Once
you see what I mean.
once they get onto the island, or once they leave land out to the ocean onto the island, someone else is controlling it.
Yeah, and so at that point, are you really actively, in a practical sense, managing and controlling?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now, that's as opposed to maybe, do you have the ability to manage and control? Should you be managing and controlling?
Yep.
What level of management and control should you exercise? So you can see, is there a difference, and according to the law there is, between the sentence, do you manage and control? Do you have the ability to manage and control?
Yep.
Do you manage and control in practicality?
Yep.
And then do you have the ability to manage and control in practicality?
Okay.
And you're literally kind of going through these steps
Yep.
when you're thinking about where you lie in this journey.
What's the difference then between, I know the semantic difference, but between do you manage and control and do you have the ability to manage and control? What's the legal differentiation?
Yeah, so obviously think of it this way. Do I have my hands on the thing, or
Okay.
am I allowed to put my hands on the thing?
Yeah,
There's a
okay.
bit of that's, I think, a really simple way of thinking about that. But then there's another question, which is, am I supposed to have my hands on the things,
Yep.
but I chose not to?
Okay, yep.
And then you might think I'm supposed to have my hands on the thing, but I actually don't have the ability to, and I'm not allowed to contract out of it.
Yep.
But it's probably just not my thing to have hands on.
Yep.
And so hopefully that's made sense to some people out there. What effectively that means, and the court does a really nice example, which I'll use here, of saying, look, we're explicitly not going to talk about building owners.
Okay.
Because this is a land fact case.
Yep.
But I think by talking about a building owner, it helps shed light on the land case, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, these guys effectively had land and they let people on it.
Yep.
And they kind of said, that's it. You know, we've got a whole lot of requirements to make sure that you do your job properly, but it's your job, it's not my job, and it's your workplace, it's not my workplace.
Okay. And therefore, I'm not managing and controlling.
Now, in the instance of, say, a building, and let's use this building here, right? Let's say it was owned by me because I'm a wealthy landlord, and the EMA was in here going about its business, and something happened. The question would be, have I just literally given you a license to walk onto the land, i.e. into my building, and is that the sum total of what I need to do?
Right.
Now, in respect of a building, that's a bit more of a workplace. It's a bit more of a thing that I can control. Like, there'll be question marks, for instance, around, should I be obliged to ensure that the seismic strength and reasonableness of the building is maintained and applied? Well, I think the court implies, and I think they're probably right.
Well, you would be required to ensure that there's a building warrant of fitness and stuff, yeah?
So in that sense, your kind of obligation, the upstreamness.
Yep.
So it's really about saying it's pretty clear that an entity or a person owns and operates a business. Right here, boom, done. But there will be circles of influence around that where you have the ability to manage or control that workplace. And that section 37 deals with those circles. And what it basically says is some of those circles will attract liability and some of those circles won't.
Okay.
And what we know is if you're purely a landowner doing nothing else, then you're in a circle that's a no. And then if you're in a circle where you own a building and people are using it as a workplace, you're probably in a circle that's a yes. And there might be a circle in the middle of those two that has some different characteristics that we have yet to find out about and the courts have yet to grapple with.
Let's go back to the difference then. So Whakaari White Island, it was land and land only. Many workplaces in New Zealand, it's building and land. So the building is something that they have, influence is the wrong word, but again, they need to
use manage and control.
That's what I'm after. So building something that they can manage and control, they have the ability to manage control. That would include, for example, ensuring that the building's got a current warrant of fitness, and is following the Building Act and applicable codes. What about then? And if I'm digging too deep and going in the wrong direction, just haul me back, okay? But what about then a landowner / building owner's responsibility to ensure that the land is safe? Now, notwithstanding the fact that Whakaari White Island was an active volcano, so just move away slightly. What about if it's like a farm? Let's say that I own some farmland and I've leased my farmland to someone else to either graze cattle on or whatever. Do I then have a responsibility to ensure that, for example, that piece of farmland is safe / secure / unlikely to incur a slip, after bad weather? Does that come into
that is a great question.
Yeah.
And it's such a great question that it even gets asked in the judgment.
Okay.
A couple of times in various different ways. And so the first off, I guess the kind of initial point to begin with is that philosophically, the court says you can't really think about this in the context of the dangerousness of the site.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine, you've got at this end, White Island, an active volcano space.
Yep.
Or over here, it might be a farm where you've got some lovely butterflies growing up in the greenhouse kind of thing, or out in just the natural land. There's no house at all, and you're letting people walk along to look at them.
Yeah.
Kind of fundamentally, the obligation doesn't shift necessarily because of the dangerousness of that piece, because that piece is someone else's piece.
Okay.
It's really around essentially saying what services and what obligations, what management and control of that workplace do you have? And essentially, I think the best way of describing it is the closer it is to you literally just stand at the gate and open it, and that's it. Like, you're letting them have access. The further away from that centerpiece you are, the outer circle, no liability. If, for instance, you started doing things like running a coffee shop on your land off to the side of this experience, then I think you're starting to look like you're actually offering the service, or you're connected to the service, and certainly that space in place and contiguous and connected sites where those people then go, because you can all be sharing pieces, then all starts to happen very quickly. So you want to think of it, I think, more as kind of like a bare skin rental. If you're in because we've been in the music business, you can hire a hall, and it's just, here's the key, you do what you will. You start offering gear and singers and lights, then you're more into this experience. Now, to be clear, the use of a hall is bad because a building is fundamentally bad, but you understand the concept of bare versus starting to add. And I guess the bareness is like right down to bare land.
And therefore, bare land, in this case, the appeal, I think you've alluded to, their assessment was no liability.
Yeah. Or I guess ultimately, to be more technical, it was that the first judgment had erred, and there was this. So in terms of a judgment like that, you kind of say, is there a relationship that gives rise to a duty? Have you met the standard of discharging that duty or not? And then is that breach a breach that meets the criteria of the legislation?
And in this case, the duty was around managing and controlling.
And the court basically says the second time around that doesn't exist here, because what you're doing doesn't meet the standard of the text around managing and controlling. But it's, I think for a New Zealand entity, especially something that's, maybe operating in the adventures space, you'll need to be very, very careful. So I think the kind of out there in the universe theory is, if it's just your land, you're okay. Like, you're not part of the process of the offering or the workplace. You stand outside of the health and safetyness of it all, as long as you do all the normal, reasonable things you would expect to do. You are proper about how you allow people in and out of the access. You've got obligations on them to make sure they do the proper work. You're all the things you would reasonably do to be a reasonable operator, you do. That's kind of, you'll be okay. Whereas I think it's slightly different to that.
Grey different or clear different?
I think, to an extent, it's grey different now, because we're going to need a couple more cases. It will become clear different. But I think you kind of need to be really crystal clear that you're just offering land. Because I think kind of land plus a smidgen will move you, I think, from that outer circle to a more inner circle. And that's where the debate will be over time.
And the smidgen is clear if it's a building.
Well, again, the courts expressly refused to comment on that. They were using it as an example that they didn't need to use. But yes, I think that would be true.
What would then, and just maybe to finish off with, building certainly seems clear. Need to make sure that the building is safe. What if the land includes a paved road or a bordered walkway, and you as the landowner would put that in there? Would you be required to ensure the upkeep and maintenance of that thoroughfare?
Well, again, so there's a couple of different things with that. The first one is, it's your land, presumably. It's your road. Of course, it's yours to secure maintenance and upkeep. But the question is, have you somehow or other then become a PCBU that's now connected upstream enough to be liable in the event of some sort of accident or concern around the use of that road or whatever? And I think, again, you're going to come down to, have you provisioned that? Do they use the road for the work? Or is it on the other side of the hill doing nothing because you used it to get the trees out 20 years ago? There'll be debates and arguments about all of that. But in principle, I think if you're making an actual contribution to the undertaking, as opposed to just allowing, then I think I think this case is a smaller exception to liability than some people think. And I would advise people to be more mindful of what they do specifically and be very clear about what they offer, even in respect of land. And I would also advise people to be really clear with their documentation and their licensing and their rules and responsibilities and the relative expectations of the parties. I think what this case does is it tells us, even though this particular entity goes from being inside the circle to outside the circle, it tells us that's very hard to do, which kind of fundamentally makes sense when you consider the kind of legislation it is and what it wants to avoid.
So if people needed advice on things like this, who could they go to?
Someone much smarter than me, I think, is the first answer. Look, I think at this point, if you're undertaking that sort of adventure or you're undertaking something like that, you do need to get proper legal advice.
Yep.
And that advice isn't just around, are you in or are you out and what do you need to do? That'll be right down to these are the words and the documents that should be used as your license. This is how you'd structurally set up a holding company and the company that manages this. This is liable for this. This is responsible for that. And then, you'd even probably want to set up a subgroup where all the parties that are using it get together, manage affairs and what have you on that space. There's a whole lot to seek advice on.
But very worthy of a good conversation. And you've explained, even though there is an element of grey still there, I think, Murray, you've explained the details around that case really, really well.
It's 100 pages.
Yes.
I'm sure you could sit down with another lawyer and get a different story, but I think ultimately we all get to the same place.
Which is, this was an exceptional out, and meaning, of course, that it's more likely that you would be in, but in this case, quite exceptionally so, they were out.
Yeah, I wouldn't be relying on this as my get out of jail free card.
No. All right. Good advice. Thank you so much for coming here today.
A pleasure.
Really appreciate it. A difficult topic to discuss. Not so much the legal side of it, but certainly with the tragedy. Appreciate your time, and we'll have you back again.
Thanks, Kev.
You could be enthusiastic about that. No, you are. You're good. So, thanks for viewing or for listening, everybody. I hope that you found that interesting. Again, just a recognition of the tragedy that occurred, the 22 people that died and the 25 people that were severely injured. Our thoughts go out to the friends and family and whānau of them. We look forward to seeing you again on another EMA Health and Safety podcast. Until then, stay safe out there and goodbye.